Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be making a case as to why these might just be the best lifting shoes in existence. So these are the Vivobarefoot Primus Light, and spoiler alert, I'm a huge fan. I've been using these for a couple of years now, and my lifting is much improved, my stability is much improved, and my general interaction with the ground is much improved. And those are all things that I'm going to cover in today's video. So I'm going to break it down into a bit of a chat around stability and allowing our foot to do its natural thing, as well as a bit of a discussion on how we are removing the interference that you can get with other shoes that you often see in the gym, a bit of a comparison with running shoes, sort of CrossFit-y hybrid shoes, and then lifting shoes, so that we can cover the range and talk about where other things have certain performance benefits and how you can utilize them and how I utilize them. And then we'll just do a bit of a summary as well as exploring some of the research around how wearing Vivobarefoot shoes on a daily basis can improve your foot strength. And if you're in the business of getting stronger, you're going to the gym, you're lifting weights, why not strengthen your feet, strengthen your whole kinetic chain as well on a day-to-day basis? Win, 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 win is what I'm hearing right now. So before we go any further, if you want a bit of a breakdown as well as to why and how I've engaged with Vivobarefoot over the past couple of years, you can head to this video here to hear about my experience after 4 months wearing them. And you can go to this video here to see what my experience has been like after 18 months. We are about 2 years down the line now, so I've got a lot of insights to share from a personal point of view, as well as from a general interest and research understanding point of view. So I'm going to share those with you today. So please, if at any stage you do enjoy the video, do drop it a like, make sure you subscribe down below, and drop a comment with your thoughts, feelings, or questions. Or if you've got any experiences wearing Vivobarefoots and you would like to share them down below, then please do. So I think it's about time we got into a bit of a breakdown of why these might just be the greatest lifting shoes ever to have existed. Okay, so first thing we are going to cover is a bit of a discussion around stability in general and how we are allowing our feet to do their natural thing when wearing this style of footwear. So because the internet is a very weird, dangerous, and frankly quite ridiculously strange place at times, I am not going to use my feet to demonstrate. I'm going to instead use my hands. So if you're here for the wrong reasons, then it's probably time for you to leave, I'm afraid. So Vivos are wide, thin, and flexible. And by that, we can see they can collapse inwardly. They don't have any support whatsoever. They are very, very thin. They basically act as a puncture proof between your foot and the floor. And that is because they want your foot to be able to interact with the floor in the most natural way. Natural meaning least interference, I guess. So the reason that they're wide is because our feet are naturally quite wide. And the reason that we have toes that we can spread, splay, is because they are all anchor points for the rest of our body. Our big toe, I'll use the thumb, that makes more sense. Our big toe is a strong part of our body which connects our FHL basically through to our lower limbs, and that acts as a real anchor and pulling point for general movement on a day-to-day basis. Whether it's walking or running, our big toe is a really essential part of what helps us to move effectively. So when wearing conventional shoes, like these for example, you can see how narrow those are in comparison to these ones here. And what that does is bind your feet in like this, which means you're not allowing any interaction with the floor. You are basically creating one anchor point, and then you've got the interference of the sole as well, which is stopping you from engaging with the floor. So what we can do is spread our feet out, engage with the floor, and really twist ourselves in. So when you're squatting, a cue I like to use is to try and screw yourself into the floor. And basically by wearing Vivos, by engaging with our feet in the way they're intended to be used, we can really spread into the floor, give ourselves a stronger base, build more tension when we brace, build more tension through our position, and ultimately become stronger over time. Top end strength work is generally about improving efficiency beyond raw strength, and a great way to do that is to build your strength from the ground upwards, build your tension from the ground upwards, and really improve your base into the floor. So that is a key stability metric there. And another consideration is Chuck Taylors are a very, very popular lifting shoe. But whilst they are somewhat flat, there is a bit more of a sole than there are in these, and they aren't wide, which means that you're limited in how much you can really splay and engage with the floor and twist yourself into it. So that's why I prefer these over Chucks, why I prefer these over Vans, because flat isn't necessarily the only box to be ticked for heavy deadlifting, heavy squatting, any bench pressing, any general movement in the gym. Obviously, if you are doing specialist stuff like Olympic weightlifting, we'll come on to that. But from a day-to-day point of view for general lifting, allowing yourself to really spread and engage and screw yourself into the floor by having those anchor points in your toes, that is something that can improve your kinetic chain from the bottom upwards. So the other thing to mention is proprioception. So by having as little interference from the bottom as possible and allowing our foot to do its natural thing, as I've already mentioned, we can feel the floor a little bit more, which means that when we are squatting, if our heels are turning out a little bit, if we're sort of leaning inwardly a little bit, you can start to feel and refine this process proprioceptively, and that will allow you to improve your movement over time, get more feedback from your feet to your brain, and you will be able to really feel movements more effectively moving forwards. If, conversely, you are in a shoe that really restricts that movement, puts a big chunky sole between you and the floor, you're not going to get any of that feedback. And not only are you depriving yourself of the sensory feedback that goes into the movement, you're disengaging your foot from the floor somewhat, which means that the stability beneath you puts you at a higher risk of injury because you are subject to something that you are not necessarily controlling. So that leads quite nicely into point number 2, which is about removing interference from us and the floor. We want to be as solid on the floor as possible for heavy deadlifts, heavy squats, any sort of lifting that requires us to be solid and planted, or even dynamic, because this allows us to really engage with the floor and understand how we're moving rather than just how we're getting from A to B, if that makes sense. So by having a thin sole, we are basically barefoot. You'll see people deadlifting in socks, you'll see people deadlifting and squatting barefoot because they want to remove that interference. But deadlifting in socks can reduce the friction between you and the ground, whereas this rubber will obviously help you plant into the ground. From a gym perspective, it means that you're not that weirdo walking around in socks or in bare feet in a public gym. A lot of places have rules about that, so having these on basically means that your feet aren't being restricted in any way by footwear, and it is allowing you to use your feet as they were intended, as they are most biomechanically effective, therefore stronger from the base up, etc., etc., etc. So removing interference from the floor and you, i.e. your body, is very important, and that's why these are so fantastic, because they are wide, thin and flexible, which leads nicely into point number 3, which is a comparison and a bit of a way of contextualizing the things I've just said. So here we have wide, thin, flexible shoes, zero interference between you and the floor other than that very thin layer of rubber. You have the ability to spread your feet into the ground, really, really ground yourself and build that tension from the ground upwards. You've got the grip to give you some friction between you and the gym floor. You've got the sort of societally acceptable shoe wearing that tends to go on in a public gym rather than being in socks or bare feet. So you're reaping all the rewards of being barefoot without actually having to be barefoot, which is probably a bonus in my mind. So let's take a look at running shoes and how different they are. So obviously, there's the obvious differences, is that there is a big chunky sole on the bottom of these, and there is also a drop. So these are not only wide, thin and flexible, but there is zero drop between the heel and the toe. There is no raised heel, as you would conventionally find in most footwear. Most footwear tends to have between a 4 and 10 millimeter drop. If you're in boots or something like that, it can be even higher. These have got an 8 millimeter drop. So that means that from here to there is an 8 millimeter downward sort of angle that we're dealing with, which means that we are tilted a little bit further forward. So just for an example, if you are standing here in a pair of Vivo Primus lights, as I currently am, this is what it looks like when we're in zero drop. So I am standing ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, all in line. And that is how I'm naturally meant to sort of stand, because it keeps my hips in line with where they should be. However, if you raise a bit of a drop, so if I get up onto my heels here, you'll notice that everything just shifts forwards a little bit. And what this is going to do over time is negatively reinforce movement patterns that you don't really want to be practicing. So we are most strong in this position because this is how we were sort of biomechanically evolved to operate. So if you chuck in an 8 millimeter drop height and a really chunky, squidgy sole, that is a big layer of foam that is interfering with us grounding ourselves on the floor. It means that when you put weight through this, you're going to be wobbling around a little bit, you're going to be putting your ankles and your hips more at risk, you're losing tension, and ultimately strength is basically being as tense and braced as possible and holding that through the movement pattern. If you become loose, you might tip forward, you might lose your center of gravity, injuries can happen. So we want to be as strong from the ground upwards as we can. Obviously, if you're running, these are great for running, but in the gym, I would advise avoiding shoes like these on a day-to-day basis. So that is comparison number 1. Comparison number 2 is a bit of a middle ground, which is the Nano. So this is a Reebok Nano, but this can be a Metcon. It could be one of the rad global new shoes I've seen kicking about. These are a sort of hybrid CrossFit style shoe whereby you've got a bit of a drop height to mimic some elements of an Olympic weightlifting shoe. You have a solid plant so that there's a lot of rigidity in the sole, which means that you've got a bit more of a plant for Olympic weightlifting, for high bar squatting, etc., etc. And you've got a bit of a wider toe box, but you'll notice from here it's still very narrow at the end, which is forcing your toes to sort of close in on themselves. So what that's doing is it's giving you a really solid static base, but it's not allowing you to engage with your feet in the floor, which means you're switching off the nerve endings in there. You're not getting the proprioceptive feedback. And because it is so rigid, you are switching your feet off from the movement itself. So these are, these are a great CrossFit shoe, I'm not gonna lie. They are perfectly fit for purpose in that. I'm not gonna pretend that they're not, because they are tried and tested. They do what they say on the tin. However, from a deadlifting point of view, these tip you forwards, which means your hips and positions are gonna be all off. If you're squatting in these are great because they give you a bit of heel raise, which can improve ankle mobility, obviously, but you're not getting that feedback into the floor, which means you might be a bit looser. And the lack of movement that you get in these is switching your feet off, which means that you're potentially missing out on some of the stability benefits that come from being in a pair of these. So rigidity in a shoe is good to a certain point because this allows us to be really solid under a heavy barbell, but when it comes to more dynamic movement, you lose the spring from your FHL, from your big toe, you lose a bit of that feeling and that control, so your perception of your movement is a little bit off. And you're losing some of the strength benefits that come from engaging with your feet on a day-to-day basis in training. So to summarize here, these are really, really fantastic for heavy top-end stuff where we need to be as grounded and planted as possible. They're great to be feeling dynamic movement, but if you're working in Olympic weightlifting and you're needing to be doing some more dynamic movement as you go, these are a great compromise. However, if you have the ankle mobility to be able to move effectively in these for Olympic weightlifting and getting under thrusters, etc., then I'd say that these were the preference. However, not that many of us really do have that, myself included, in terms of ankle mobility. So if I was doing thrusters or high bar squats or Olympic weightlifting, I would separate that as part of my programming and wear these specifically for that. So these are the original OG Addy Powers. They have a, can't remember what the drop height is, but it's pretty aggressive and it's got a really, really solid base. So that is there to basically allow you to plant and slam yourself into the floor. But as you'll notice, very, very narrow in the toe box, which means you're quite restricted. You don't have as much control over the movement from the bottom, and your base is only stable because of this. You are not the thing that is stable, this is stabilizing you. And I think that's an important distinction to make at this point. These allow you to engage with your feet naturally and use them to stabilize you, rather than allowing the shoes to do the job for you. So, just so we're clear, for my Olympic weightlifting, for any thrusters, for any high bar squats, for any front squats, 60 bar squats, I wear these because I'm doing them in isolation rather than as part of a broader Metcon. But that is because it is an assistance movement. For my top end strength work, my deadlifts, my back squat, my low bar back squats, my bench pressing, any kettlebell work, any dumbbell work, it's all done in these because it allows me to engage with my feet in a natural way. It allows me to really engage with the floor. It allows me to have a really strong base, and that's why I use them. I have very little use for these. A lot of people try and run in these as part of a broader Metcon, and I can think of nothing worse to run in, to be perfectly honest. They're so rigid, you don't get any feedback, and you've got a raised heel, which is just completely unnatural in terms of a running pattern, so not something I'd recommend there. But for CrossFit athletes doing a lot of Metcons, these are obviously a fantastic shoe. I'm not going to pretend that they aren't. For my tempo and speed work, I am in a pair of shoes like this. For my trail running, I am in a pair of Vivos with my trail soles on them, so trail firm ground soles on. You might have seen me lifting over the years in a high top pair of Vivos, which I just use because I've always liked them, and powerlifters, you know, we like high tops, it's part of the blood. So that is how I approach things from a general basis. These shouldn't really be worn in the gym for any lifting in any circumstances, I'm going to suggest, whether you're a beginner or not. If you're a beginner, you are probably slightly weaker in your connective chain, your hips, your knees, etc. So you want as much stability as possible to support that and to prevent injury. And this is only going to send you in the other direction. So something to consider there. Finally, point number, is it 3 or 4? I can't remember. We'll put it on the screen just here. Point number 4 is the strengthening benefits that come from wearing Vivobarefoot. So last year, a really exciting study came out of the University of Liverpool by Chris Dehout and the gang. And it determined that after 6 months wearing Vivobarefoot shoes on a daily basis, you can improve your foot strength by up to 60%. And that was measured by the power outputted through your FHL, your big toe, in a sort of pressing motion. So after 6 months, 60% increase in foot strength just by wearing Vivos on a day-to-day basis. So that is aside from doing the strength work, that is just walking around in a pair of Primus lights. This was the test. This was the shoe used in the testing, and those were the results. So I'm generally walking 8 to 12,000 steps a day, and I've been doing that in Vivos for the past 2.5 years. And I can honestly tell you, my stability, the strength in my feet, the strength in my ankles, the feeling in my knees and my hips is all massively, massively, massively improved as a result of wearing these on a day-to-day basis. So that means that when I come into the gym, I feel much more reinforced, much stronger under a heavy barbell, much stronger in my sumo deadlift position, because I don't have the fatigue that's built up from being in an unnatural position. I don't have the aches in my knees, I don't have the aches in my hips that come from walking in a raised heel, where I'm kind of walking like this, tilted forwards. And then good example as well is walking in a raised heel can allow us to develop negative movement patterns walking and running. So running injuries are obviously very common. You'll speak to your mum and she'll be like, oh, don't overdo it. You've got to be careful. Running's bad for your knees. All this stuff that we've heard for years and years. And there is some truth in that, because overstriding is generally what's bad for us. And what can also be useful is if you're going to implement some running as well, these are a great way to recalibrate your cadence and your movement patterns with a running focus, because it allows you to basically not overstride. If you're walking in these as well, you'll find that you're not going to be able to overstride like this, where we'll note that all the impact is going straight up here. So that is out in front of us. So it's not going through our knees, it's not going through our hips, up into our shoulders. Whereas when we're walking and running, we want the center of gravity. I'm going to shut the other one down, so I made it seem like it was on purpose. We want the center of gravity to be basically up through our knees, up through our hips and into our shoulders, because that basically gives us a sort of run through or a throughput of the transient impact coming from the floor. So running, where most injuries come from, is from not heel striking, common misconception. Heel striking is a common association with overstriding, but heel striking in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. But for running, if you are overstriding, all that impact is going into our knee and nowhere else. Whereas if we learn to forefoot strike a little bit more and bring our center of gravity closer to us and directly underneath us, then that impact will be going up through us and we've got a higher tolerance for impact over time. So simply walking around in Vivos day to day is going to make your movement more efficient. It's going to make your movement more robust. It's going to strengthen your feet, as I've already covered, and it is going to make you a more robust overall athlete in general. Whether that is strength, whether that's hybrid training, whether that's running, there are benefits to be reaped as an individual. So I think that's pretty much it. The real top line summary is there aren't many shoes out there that allow your feet to engage with the floor in a natural way. A lot of shoes don't allow our feet to do their natural thing, which is to display, engage with the floor, twist ourselves in and use our big toe as the anchor that it is biologically evolved to be. If you are just standing around, if you just go onto the balls of your feet and try and sort of move around, you'll feel very unstable. But then the second you put your big toe down, you've got so much more control. So that just, my outside toes are disengaged. So right now I'm doing this. So I'm just putting my big toe down and I can pull myself forwards. I've got so much more control through my FHL, which goes into my calves. And then that is ultimately there to anchor us down. So when you're running, you're almost engaging and pulling back with your big toe. And that's something that we should try and switch on as much as we can, because it will give us a more solid base. It will reduce interference between us and the floor. It will allow us to spread our feet into the ground, which is probably the one thing about this narrative in lifting footwear I think is often missed. So Chuck Taylors are the age-old classic, as I've mentioned, but I think the one thing they do miss is that ability to really spread your feet into the floor at the toes rather than just in the shoes themselves, because they are flat, but there is a little bit of interference and they don't allow your toes to spread. So I don't want it to seem in any way like I'm bashing the things that aren't broken, the Chucks, the Vans out there, because there are some very, very strong people out there that might be like, why is this guy telling me to lift in Vivos? I've been lifting in Chucks for 40 years. Maybe you have, that's completely valid. However, I think you get a bit more of a reinforced solid base from wearing Vivobarefoot Primus lights, personally. So I think that's pretty much it for this video. If you would like to save yourself 10% off Vivos, then you can use the code Fergus10 to do so at checkout. There is a description link down below as well. But that is really my 2 cents on why I've got so much out of Vivos, why I think you can get so much out of Vivos, and why the Primus lights might just be the best all-round lifting shoe for the day-to-day person ever to have existed. So don't forget to like the video. Make sure you've commented with your thoughts, feelings, anything I've missed, any debates you want to have, any experiences you've had in the comments down below. And obviously, if you haven't already, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Just do it before I've said it? Do it before I've said it? Oh, you've done it? Okay, yeah, make sure you subscribe. Cheers, thank you. That was good of you. Appreciate that. So, that's it from me. See you next time.